Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stu and the Nunn. This is episode 401 here, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. And bigger thank you to our guest, Major General retired Bert. First time I've said it to you, so help me if I got it right. I've been practicing all day. Mizusawa.
Good enough.
Good enough.
Mizusawa.
All right,
split it right in half.
All right, there we go. Close enough for government work. All right, that'll work. Well, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Really glad to have you. I hope everyone straps in. We're gonna have a quick hour. There's a lot to cover, and I'm glad for you giving us some of your time tonight.
It's good to be with you, Stu.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Well, hey, you, as everybody can see, you're retired Major General. We're going to walk through your career some. We're going to talk about what you're doing now and how you're continuing to try to serve your country and community. But one thing I looked at was, your upbringing. Obviously, you have accomplished a lot in your military career. And your upbringing, from what I understand, was in Hawaii. You have kind of a Japanese American heritage. You have deep family traditions, and I was just wondering, before you came in, or when you were thinking about coming in, was there anything about your past, your history, or your parents and grandparents or whatever that led you to want to join the military? Was there something you saw or experienced or just knew in your life that made you think that's the way I want to go?
Well, it was a fateful decision. But first of all, do you go by Troy online, or is it Stu? Because I know Stu and the Nunn. I was going to ask you, where did you come up with that name?
Yeah, Stu's just a half of my last name, so I just kind of go by. But I go by. You can call me Troy; it's just fine. Yeah, everybody knows me.
All right, good. Well, I didn't really have an epiphany that drew me into the military. I really didn't know much of a different lifestyle. I was born into the military. My parents met while my dad was stationed in Europe, and there's kind of an interesting history there. My father's immediately older brother was killed in the Korean War in 1951, September 1951. And I looked it up, and it was during the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge, and he was in the 1st of the 9th Infantry Regiment, which is part of the 2nd Infantry Division.
Yeah, man.
So, of course, I didn't know about any of this. I was born afterwards, but my dad told me a little bit about his brother being killed, and they didn't know much about it. But one thing that did happen was, because my father was in the Army then, Korea was a very intense war. Not many people realize how intense it was. It was 1 year of very active combat, but then there was 2 more years of fighting back and forth, kind of a stalemate. But we lost a lot of soldiers there. I think in around 38,000 in that range. But because of a policy they had that they didn't want 2 brothers killed in the same conflict, and back then it was brothers because men were the ones that were populating the forces that were being killed, they assigned my father to the other theater where they needed a lot of manpower. and that was in the European occupation in the early 50s. So he ended up getting assigned to Austria initially, and then to France. And apparently he got around. He had a motorcycle, and he met my mother in Amsterdam. So, this was post-World War II. They both were the youngest of very large families and the only ones that married outside of their family and out of their community and out of their culture. And of course, I was cognizant of any of this. The first memories I have was being a young kid being raised in Oklahoma and wanting to be a cowboy because that was cowboy country. Later on, as I got older, I understood the history was that my father had moved back to Hawaii after he had met my mother. My older brother was born in France. I was born in Hawaii. But I ended up moving with my mother to the Netherlands for 2 years when I was only 6 months old. So even though a lot of people think I'm from Hawaii, my middle name is Hawaiian, my father's family was from Hawaii, I actually left when I was a baby. 6 months old, spent the next 2 years in the Netherlands. Then my dad decided to join the Air Force, and then they met again in Oklahoma, and then we went to Ohio, Japan, Germany, Virginia, so many places. So I essentially was raised as an Air Force brat. Neither one of my parents had gone to college. And when I was a junior in high school, it was in Frankfurt High School, Germany, I started doing some research on colleges. And back then, you would take a preliminary SAT test just to look at your aptitude. And all of a sudden, I felt pretty important because I was getting all these letters in the mail from colleges that wanted me. Now that I've grown up, I realize that a lot of those were solicitations because they're all looking for your tuition dollars. But it was a big deal to me. And one of the places that I heard from was West Point. And because my parents didn't really have a lot of money, my dad was a buck sergeant with 6 kids. That was pretty attractive to me. And my older brother didn't go to college. So I was looking at places that I thought we could afford. And so my senior year, I moved back to Virginia, my dad's last assignment. And one of the unfortunate parts of being raised as a military kid, you don't really establish residence anywhere. I never knew what the word hometown meant. Everybody's talking about a hometown. But unfortunately, I was not eligible to get in-state residence in Virginia. And someone decided that the only place where I had legal residence was in Hawaii, even though I left there when I was 6 months old, which made it very hard for me to get a nomination to get into the academies. As it turns out, it was kind of a fluke. My dad had about 1 month left on active duty when I was going through this process. And I discovered late in the game that I was eligible for a presidential nomination. I didn't have to rely on the senators or the congressmen if I was able to get one from the president. Well, those are very hard to get, but I applied and I got one right away. And so I went to West Point. My dad only gave me one bit of advice in his entire life, because I was also given an appointment to the Air Force Academy. And he said, well, you should go into the Air Force because it's a much easier life. So I spent about 40 years in the Army being reminded about my dad and how right he was when he gave me that advice. So West Point, it was kind of advertising the whole man concept back then. I should add that I was in the last all-male class at West Point, so that was appropriate. And what they did is they looked at academics, obviously, which was very important because it is a prestigious place to get undergraduate education. But it was also athletics, and I was a 3-sport letterman, and finally leadership. And so I liked the fact that they were interested in what they called the whole man at the time, a balance of 3 different skill sets or areas where you would have some potential. So I ended up going there. I was also being recruited to wrestle. I was a pretty decent high school wrestler, but I made the right choice. I was faithful. I mean, it's hard to compare what would have happened otherwise. But, I worked hard. Because I was the first person in my family to go to college, I knew I had to stick with it. There weren't any other alternatives that I thought would have been viable at the time. And so I ended up graduating first in my class out of like 1,400 cadets. And as you might imagine, that got me off to a pretty good start in a military career. Yeah. And but every time I had to make a decision, I was not totally sold on a military career. You have to understand, at that time, I started at West Point in 1975. It was right after the Vietnam War officially ended. And so the military was not the most popular institution at that point in time. I mean, it was probably one of the least popular institutions, which was a sea change if you fast forward 25 years when it became the most popular institution for many years running. but I stuck with it. I decided if I was going to be in the military, and in this case, the Army, I wanted to do what the Army was designed to do, which was to be a combat arms officer. So I chose the infantry, probably the hardest part of the military. And I was a paratrooper, which is one of the hardest parts of the infantry. And I went to what was a very elite unit in Vicenza, Italy, as a paratrooper. So, I can go over the rest of my career, but that's pretty much how I got started. Once you opt into a service academy, they start making a lot of decisions for you. But fortunately, I did well enough that I had some great options to choose from. And after I served for 3.5 years in Italy as a paratrooper on a frontline unit, my name came to the attention of people in the Korean DMZ because they were looking for a commander out there. It was a very unique command. It was, I think, the only command in the Army where you were kind of selected at the Department of the Army level. And I really didn't know what I was getting into. But kind of a side story was when I was just finished my first year at West Point, we went into some summer training at Camp Buckner, which is outside of West Point, and there was a tragic incident that occurred in the Korean DMZ. This was summer of 1976. And the reason it was brought home to us is, number one, we were budding military officers, but also the family of the captain that was accident death in the DMZ. His name was Art Boniface. His family was at West Point at the time because the assignment that he had before he went to the Korean DMZ was as a teacher at West Point, one of the instructors. So his family decided to stay back at West Point while he deployed to Korea. And he was within a few weeks of deploying back to reunite with his family when the axe murders occurred. Just for those of your audience who don't know about it, it had to do with just kind of clearing out a tree for line of sight in the Korean DMZ. So one of our friendly outposts could see the other one. The North Koreans were interspersed in the area, and it ended up in an intense fight. And the company commander was killed, and his second in command lieutenant was killed, brutally murdered or clubbed to death by North Koreans. And lo and behold, I ended up in his job about 8 years later. But I didn't anticipate that, but that's just what happened.
Yeah. The military and the Army definitely throws curveballs to you along the way. I want to wheel it back just a little bit. So it's interesting how you never knew what hometown was. Growing up as a military brat, probably regardless of branch. I mean, you moved all around like I did. In my house, it wasn't, you weren't grounded. You were on restriction. I remember the first time I went to a civilian school, someone said, "Can I go play?" And I'm like, "I'm on restriction." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I didn't know the concept of grounded. Everything in my house was military. I'm sure yours was the same way.
Yeah.
But I also wonder, myself being a military brat, my oldest son was also a combat medic, and I know he put a lot of pressure on him like I did myself. Did graduating, getting to West Point's one thing, and getting a presidential recommendation is definitely, awesome. But being able to graduate at the top of your class, did you find in your career where you were the hardest on yourself, that you had one goal, not the 70%, but the 101%? Was that kind of what drove you because of just the expectations?
Well, no. I guess I had some natural gifts. Academics was very challenging at West Point, but when I was in high school, I was pretty good at mathematics. And so I was taking advanced courses, and math and boxing are maybe two of the hardest courses, and survival swimming at West Point. And so if you're good with your numbers, West Point was the degree you get there was in general engineering, at least back when I graduated. And the core curriculum, about 90% of it was decided for you. You didn't have options to get majors like they do today. Mm-hmm. And it was a pretty demanding curriculum with the sciences. So because I took the time to get into advanced courses in high school, back probably before it was popular, I was pretty well prepared to get into West Point. So I was able to not have to worry about that as much and focus on other things that I wanted to. So, coming out of West Point first in your class it's unique. And obviously, you feel like you have to meet or exceed standards. I was very grateful for the fact that I could go to West Point. I mean, it was free. In no other country would I have had that opportunity. And so I was so grateful for it. I always felt that I owed the country something. My parents were so happy. You know, my mother and father, father was not an immigrant. He's Japanese American. His parents immigrated around 1905, that time frame. But I mentioned he met my mother in the Netherlands. She was the immigrant. She was from Amsterdam, and she did not become an American until 1997. But over the time that she had spent in the U.S. and traveling around with my father, I mean, she appreciated America more and more, and especially the opportunities that it gave to us kids that she and my father had. So, you know, getting an education like they have at the academies, you should never take that for granted. I was extremely fortunate to kind of stumble into it in a way, and I've always felt that I've owed this country a lot, given what they've given me.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, that's that is as a trait I wish many would have in this country, and unfortunately seems to be going away. But so let's talk a little bit about you. You talked, you know, very close to home. I did not realize the commander was killed in '76. His family was still stationed there. What a way to tie it home while you're in the academy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it wasn't just, hey, this guy. It was like, no, their family's right. This guy, he just came from here. That had to make it a little bit more poignant and you know, got your guys' attention. And as you knew, and all of you, you were the next generation of leaders. And you know, after what Korea War went through, at that point, no one knew what that was going to turn. I mean, it turned into a pretty quick international incident for a few days.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know. I was stationed in Korea right at the DMZ up at Camp Grease from '89 to '90. So it was something that we studied and you know, paid attention to and all that kind of stuff. But you know, looking back when you were there as a young commander in November '84, you found yourself really in the next major incident in Korea. And can you kind of walk us through a little bit about what happened there? And because I mean, you were the next combat operation in Korea since the Korean War, since 1976 and the Korean War.
Yeah. Well, yeah, as I mentioned, I heard about the incident. It was shocking, and we almost did go to war over it. I didn't realize when I was told it was a special command for me in Korea that it was one and the same. And I think they deliberately neglected to tell me this until after I arrived in Seoul on the airplane, and I was jet lagged, and they were bringing me up with a tactical escort. And then they kind of told me about the history of the unit. And I think that was deliberate. And by the way, you 1st and 9th, that's great, because I mentioned my uncle was killed in Korea, and he was also assigned to the same infantry regiment. And they were the most forward part of the 2nd Infantry Division. And you were, was it Freedom Bridge, the Imjin River? So you were up there with us. So thanks. So that was always a great unit to work with. So yeah, I went there. It was March 1984, and I knew about the history just on the short drive up there, about an hour drive from north of Seoul. And it was interesting because I was just going through the desk drawers. I took command within a couple of days. I mean, that's just the way it was back then. I was very fortunate that most people had to spend more time in Korea before they were entrusted with command, but I pretty much knew I was going to get one coming in. So I was still jet lagged when I was basically taking the guide on as the new commander of the special force up there, the Joint Security Force. And so my first day, I was going through the drawers of the commander's desk, and I ran into documents from 8 years prior, from 1976. And some of them were documents that Art Boniface, the captain who was killed, had written. And so I had a lot of questions about the way the unit operated. But I told my soldiers, I said, hey guys, listen, if there's another incident that happens up here, we're going to fight back. And one of the things that I noticed, for better or for worse, it turned out to be for much worse, was that there was no fighting back during the axe murders, partly because there had never been weapons used, aside from axes and axe handles. Even though we were authorized to carry pistols and some sidearms, we were very limited. And so it was not only history, it was a requirement that we were very careful about using sidearms for obvious reasons. Just to give people an idea of what the operating environment was, the Korean DMZ is about 200 miles across the peninsula, and the forces are separated by 4 kilometers, 2 kilometers on each side, which is the demilitarized zone. But only in one part of that demilitarized zone do the forces actually come up to the actual border, so they're within 6 feet of each other. And that little slice is only about half a mile wide. And that circle right on the border was the Joint Security Area, or popularly known as Panmunjom. And so I commanded that area, which was the flashpoint for anything that would happen. So I had some of the best trained soldiers, and 40% of my soldiers were South Korean. They were all highly educated. They were all 2nd or 3rd degree black belts in the martial arts. On average, they were actually more qualified than my American soldiers. They all had to be a certain size because it was a special unit. But the main challenge was nothing really happened on a day-to-day basis. But over the years, there were many incidents that resulted in casualties and even deaths. So it's very hard in that sort of environment to have your soldiers on their, ready to go at a moment's notice every day when nothing really happened as part of the normal routine. And to make it even harder, I had 4 platoons, and they rotated through 3 missions and an off period. And so my units were basically with live ammunition 24/7. And I basically rotating through the different missions. And so it's very unlike any other unit in the Army. It was the most forward deployed unit, but it was also the only infantry unit that had live ammunition 24/7. So you probably want me to talk about the Soviet defector incident, which happened under my watch. And one of the interesting things that happened to me recently was, I'm running for U.S. Senate here, and I was at an event, and a person comes up to me and he says, "Hey, sir, I just want to introduce myself. He's a retired sergeant major that served in the unit in around 2017, 2018 timeframe." And he said, I really appreciate what you did back in 1984. He said, it still kind of resonates there. And I've heard that a number of times from people that said the North Koreans' behavior, they modified their behavior quite a bit after this incident. And that was actually not just by accident. When I got there, I'm not a history guy, but when it comes to operations like that, you want to know the history of a unit and why we failed more than once when it came to getting into fights with the North Koreans. And when I say fights, I'm not only talking about fist fights, but also gun fights. And it was because we always wanted to be the good guys. We always wanted to diffuse the situation. But I came to the conclusion that the North Koreans figured this out. So there was no disincentive for them to create problems and to take advantage of it and to leverage it. And so I basically put out a hard edict, and I said, listen, the next time there's violence, we're going to win. I said, I don't care how many bodies are on the ground, we're going to win. If I'm getting axed to death, I want you guys to pull out your weapons and fire. And I said that half jokingly, but only half jokingly, because I knew that unless we took a stand, the North Koreans, and by the way, the North Koreans that were on the border, they were not your average North Korean soldiers. They were all officers, and they had continuity there. My soldiers rotated on average about once a year, which made it even more challenging. But they didn't. They were there. They knew the environment. They were all highly trained, and they were tough. During the firefight, I learned that they were really tough soldiers. But I trained my soldiers pretty well. I had some great NCOs and junior officers working for me. And just because of the training we had, when we had the opportunity to respond to North Korean violence, it was sparked by a Soviet defector who ran across the border, and they came after him into our sector. But my soldiers were ready. So we basically got there the fastest with the mostest. We performed just like we trained to perform, and I was very proud of that. And to this day, it's reverberated. And there were some other things that have happened collaterally that I think benefited the history of not only the tactical history there, but I think geopolitical history. And I'll give you one example that I wouldn't have known back then, because it wasn't until 2007 when Ronald Reagan published the Reagan Diaries. And he actually had an entry in there for November 23rd, 1984. And he mentioned the incident, and he said he was very surprised that the Soviet leadership did not protest what happened, because what happened was we did rescue the Soviet defector, and we did evacuate him to Seoul. And eventually he was debriefed by our intelligence agencies. And it was very unusual that the Soviet Union did not raise that, start protesting it and demanding him back, especially since the stories that came out from the North right after this happened was that we kidnapped this guy. His name was Vasily Matuzak. We did not kidnap him. We just responded to the North Koreans trying to gun him down, and we intercepted them. Kind of a funny looking back now, but I was the only one in civilian clothes on that day because it was my day off. But the alarm was sounded. I raced up there, short some officers, and we just had to respond. And I had one of my squads move up into the swampy area just to get around where we thought the North Koreans were. And they ran into this civilian dressed in civilian clothes, and he was Caucasian, but he was speaking Korean. And at this point in time, I didn't even think about the defector. I was thinking, because I didn't know there was a defector. I just knew that there was a lot of firing going on and that we needed to win. And so as we intercepted this guy, he was laying down in a swampy area. He had like muck all over him. I basically told my soldiers, search him and hand him over. And they handed him over to me. And there were still bullets flying around. And I grabbed this person, and we kind of hunkered down behind a little mound just to get some cover. And he ended up pulling out things out of his pockets, and it turned out to be rolls of film and a passport. And he gives them to me, and he says in broken English, "I'm a Soviet citizen, and I wish to seek political asylum in America." And I'm opening up his passport, and I see the Cyrillic alphabet, and I'm stuffing the rolls of film into my jacket. And I remember thinking, wow, this is just like the movies. And it was kind of a humorous part of it. But I realized then that, hey, we have a defector on our hands, and if he gets killed, number one, I'm probably going to get killed with him, but if he gets killed, we'll have failed in our mission. And so I had to let my subordinates take over the firefight for a bit to get the defector out of there and hand him over to a senior NCO, because it was so important to make sure that he survived that. And then I rejoined the fight. Kind of interesting story, again, is after I left the Army in about a year and a half, I was at Harvard going to law school. And somebody told me that this defector was under an alias at the Fletcher School, which is right down the road. And it was him. And we reunited. Wow. And he was able to tell me his story before he defected and how the whole thing unfolded and what happened to him afterwards. And so anyway, getting back to the Reagan thing, in the mid-1980s, you'll recall that after Leonid Brezhnev died, we had a succession of a couple of Soviet leaders, Andropov, Chernenko, before they got to Mikhail Gorbachev. And there were a lot of people putting pressure on Reagan to negotiate with the Soviets to end the Cold War and get back to a kind of a more peaceful solution with the Soviets. But Reagan really wanted to stand firm. And so in his diary, he talks about the fact that the Soviets did not protest the fact that we had one of their citizens at all. And he kind of implied that convinced him to stand fast against any of their demands. And this is about the time when he went to Reykjavik, and he was excoriated in the media for not coming home with something. But if you read through the history now, I think Reagan understood that he had the stronger hand by far. The Soviets were eager to negotiate. And this incident and the lack of a Soviet protest, I think, was one of the factors that convinced him to hang tough. And so back in 2013, my last visit to the DMZ, I went there for a memorial service for my Korean soldier who was killed during the incident. And I was able to tell his parents, and they really appreciated this. They didn't speak English, but I had some interpreters, that the sacrifice of your son actually, in my mind, helped accelerate the end of the Cold War and the end of the Soviet Union, because Reagan was convinced that the Soviets were more eager to negotiate. So I think that's an interesting footnote that happened much later. But the bottom line, I was so proud of the soldiers, both Korean and Americans, and how they performed that day.
Yeah, because there were some lost on both sides, definitely some lost on the other. And
Yep.
there's so much you just covered, and we're going to get to so much more, but it was just to think about how you came full circle with the defector and were able to kind of bring it closure and see each other had to be very emotional and awesome. But also being able to talk to young, Katusa, young Korean soldiers, family, and tell him what an impact. He wasn't just a name back in the 70s or back in the 80s that was, just done and gone, that his sacrifice of that whole incident just came to a, really affected so much more globally. That is just, what a footnote. I know you and several, were recognized with Bronze Stars Review Device, and I understand as years later, I guess after maybe some of the politics calmed down or whatever it was going on at that time, they upgraded that to a Silver Star and others. Was it finally the DoD at the time finally recognized the impact and significance of what it was that you guys did? Who I'm assuming, and we can get you probably, I don't know if you ever trained that battle plan, if you ever had rehearsed metal, if you had mission. Was it, hey, if someone defects, we'll do this, or was it just you trained your guys, we're going to win whatever fight, and that's just they executed?
Yeah, so the DMZ battalion was behind us as a backup, and so they rotated, I think, every 10 weeks. So every 10 weeks, I had to bring the new leadership that was in the DMZ mission up to our area, and they were pretty nervous about it. But I told them exactly what they needed to do, and I told them exactly where I wanted them to come in with heavier weapons. And so every time I did that, I basically did a walkthrough of what my unit would do, because my unit would be in the lead before they came in. And literally, I went through some really swampy and woody area, and I kept breaking off branches to make it more recognizable if we ever had to react very quickly. So I can't say I predicted this, but the avenues that I had planned on with my other leaders turned out to be the exact way that the optimum way to come in during the firefight, given the way the North Koreans that came in and they hunkered down in the area where I thought they might need to hunker down, and to put us into a great position on their flanks. We ended up having about 8 of them surrender to us. And it's a long story what happened, because it was Thanksgiving. It was the worst possible day for something to happen. And because I mentioned my platoons rotated, it was a 48-hour rotation. We were celebrating Thanksgiving on 2 different days, so the platoons would all be able to get their Thanksgiving meal in the mess hall. But I think this was the first day of Thanksgiving on that day, and the leadership was separated. We kind of went a little easier on the holidays, and we didn't need people to be sleeping right up there outside of the joint security area. And so part of the reason I'm really proud is it was the most challenging time to have to go into combat. And they did it. And we went in without certain key leaders that showed up a little later. So some of it was fortuitous, but a lot of it was just having the right mindset and making sure that everybody moved as soon as we were alerted, and there was no hesitation, and we were able to perform without the normal complement of leaders and soldiers that we needed at that point.
Yeah, that's a testament to our doctrine, to 5-point contingency plans, to every man knowing the mission, right? And in absence of guidance or leadership, that they know where to go and what they need to do, right? Way different than the Soviets and many of the Soviet bloc countries.
Well, that's what they said in the Cold War. So anyway, you were asking me about the award situation. Korea was always kind of an anomaly. They gave out combat infantryman badges for Korea under a standard that was totally different from the normal standards for a combat infantryman badge. And it made no sense, quite frankly. And I didn't realize at the time, they actually offered me the ability as a commander to make the award of the combat infantryman's badge. I mean, I had 1 killed, 1 wounded, and of course I was in the chain of command for awards. But I told my boss, Battalion Commander Chuck Bialy, great leader, that I didn't think it was fair to give it to just the people who were killed and wounded and not give it to the other people who were not killed or wounded. And so it was a decision that I made, and I thought it was the right one at the time. But as I grew older, I and after other incidents such as Panama, I look back and I realized that I probably should have just looked out for my soldiers, even though it wasn't in accordance with the regulation. Okay. And I just so happened that my battalion commander at that time, years later, was a one-star general. We had lunch and he said, you know, Bert, he said, we had a great time together, commanders out there, but I only have one regret. And he brought that issue. He goes, I thought we should have awarded our soldiers this. And we both agreed that if we knew back then what we learned later, we would have done it. And so it's very hard to do something retroactive like that. But it took about 7 or 8 years to get the Army to realize that even though this was not a designated combat area, combat still occurred. Right. And it was kind of the flip of whenever we designate a combat area someplace and you just happen to be in the area, you get all these combat types of recognition. Well, this was the opposite. And it was such a crazy thing to have to fight the Army bureaucracy. So it was poetic justice that by the time the Army came around to agreeing with us, and when they agreed with us, they agreed with us like 200%, like, hey, yeah, this should have been taken care of many years ago. It was delayed almost 16 years by the time we were able to recognize our soldiers with a combat infantryman badge. The law on looking at other awards like the Bronze Star in the meantime had changed. And it changed when I was working in the Senate Armed Services Committee with the people that changed the law. I had nothing to do with it. But it was sort of fortuitous that by the time the Army decided that the soldiers of this unit deserved combat infantryman badges, a new law was in effect that allowed retroactive consideration. And most of it was designed for minorities during World War II. First of all, it was Black Americans, and it was Asian Americans, the Japanese Americans that fought in the famous 442nd Regimental Combat Team, including 2 of my uncles. They wanted to relook at some of those historic, failures to recognize people that probably should have been recognized. And so it just happened at the same time when the Army decided to award combat infantryman badges. And the Army came to us and said, you should put in people for awards that were not given out back then. And so also kind of coincidentally, the main platoon leader during the fight was in the Pentagon with me. I was a little later, I was a civilian in the Pentagon. So we were able to work with people who are senior generals in Korea to kind of forward some of the award recommendations up. And heck, they all got approved. Surprisingly. But I think it was poetic justice because if we would have been properly recognized back when we should have been, I don't think the awards would have ever been what they were. But we ended up, I think it was like 6 Silver Stars, which was pretty impressive. But it was an intense firefight. And one of the ways I think the Army, why it reconsidered, there was actually an audio recording of the firefight that I had in my possession, but I had lost track of it. I was able to finally find it. We have photos too. I mean, there was great documentation for it. So we ended up getting about 6 Silver Stars award at that time. And there was one kid, private first class, Mark DeVille, the most junior guy that I put in for a Silver Star, and the only one we couldn't locate. And this happened in 1999, 2000 timeframe. We were spending all that time looking for former soldiers. This was 16 years later after the incident. But we couldn't find Mark DeVille, one of the Silver Star awardees. And then fast forward another 13 years, I'm a 2-star general in the Pentagon. And I get a call out of nowhere, and it turns out to be Mark DeVille. He said, sir, somebody was searching my name on the internet, and they said I was awarded a Silver Star. And I told them there's no way in hell that was me. And then when the guy read the citation that we actually, I guess it was published somewhere, yeah. He says, wow, that was me. And so I was on the Joint Staff working as an assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So I sent the chairman a note and I said, Chairman, I really would like you to pin this guy Silver Star on. He was a little PFC back then. I think he kind of got screwed out of the ability to get recognized. turns out Mark was a prison security guard in Florida. And I told the chairman, I said, I'll fly him up if you'll pin him on. And the chairman was nice enough to say, hey, I will definitely pin him on. We'll figure out a way to fly him up. So it turns out the platoon leader, who was then in the Pentagon with me, worked for a major corporation. And back then they were funding flights up to recognize soldiers who deserve recognition. So in 2013, we had a mini reunion of the Joint Security Force with the platoon leader, the platoon sergeant, my first sergeant, and a couple of others, with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, depending on Mark DeVille, former PFC Mark DeVille Silver Star.
Wow, that was awesome. That is, you never gave up. Every man recognized, and what a testament to the drive to do that. Okay.
Well, boy, I'll have to say that wasn't the last one, because there's still people coming out of the woodworks. Not for an award like that, but for the CIB. So I basically joke, I think I'm the longest serving company commander in U.S. Army history, because every time I get a message like that, I have to go back through the files and do my job as a company commander to make sure that we get all the paperwork for them.
Yeah, still writing award recommendations all these years later.
The recommendations were done, but at this point, I don't even know where the Army Awards branch is, but I think I have one outstanding one. I hope I don't get in trouble for this. I told him just to pin the damn thing on, and I would take the heat for it.
Well, more likely the person's out. He or she, he's retired or.
Oh yeah, we're all retired, of course, but still.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for bringing that up. It was a long, interesting story, part of my life, and I'm still living it.
We may need to do a second episode, because I don't know how long you go, but I mean, this was very interesting in your career. I want to definitely talk about your political career, but having been, Toby Nunn, who's the other half of the show, he was also in Korea. I was, like I say, I was there 89 to 90, is near and dear to my heart. Toby and I have talked many times on the show of how significant it was when we watched President Trump step over the MDL.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We just felt that did not get the recognition of how impactful that was. It just meant
I agree 1,000%. And I love that photo. I was in the White House. I saw that photo and I said, wow, who would have thought? So I have a photo of me meeting with my North Korean counterpart in that same building. And one day I want to put them both together. But you know what? I actually want to figure out a way to go see President Trump. And thanks for bringing that up. I think I might want to bring those two photos with me.
Yeah. He's done a lot of firsts, and that was definitely a first. I never thought, and Toby felt the same, we'd ever see in our lifetime. Never.
I agree. Anybody who spent some time up there close to the North Koreans, they know how weird it is up there.
Yeah. Yes. A ton of stories too. I may have stepped over the MDL a time or two. We did a lot of patrols and stuff, and
we don't talk about that though, do we?
Don't talk. I could be wrong. I could have got lost, but hey, let's talk about it. So you were running for Senate against Mark Warner, and in Virginia. I've had a lot of Virginia politicians on here, but this isn't your first time. You've ran a couple times, 2010, 2018. We learn by, I always say, learn by making mistakes and learn by things not going right to do better the next time. I'm assuming you, in keep it in military terms, you AAR'd both of those attempts. And how can you, what led you to say, okay, I'm going to do it again. I'm going in 2026. And just what led you just the third time?
Well, number one, it wasn't planned. People mentioned AAR, after action report, for those who do not know. People asked me about when I ran in 2010 for Congress, and I did not win. And they said, well, you must have learned a hell of a lot. And my reply is, yeah, I did, but I would rather have won and not have learned a damn thing. But back then in 2010, I ran in a district where I had not been in for 35 years. And if you understand the way the district was, it was the most military district in the nation. Virginia Beach and Norfolk were like 90% of the district. And I was from Hampton, which was like 8%. And it was separated by a body of water. And no one had any clue who I was. And when I got in the race, I think I got a lot of grudging respect at first, which grew into something more genuine over time. I say grudging because they had already more or less picked who their nominee was going to be. But a lot of them, more than a few, came up to me and they told me that I should be running statewide. They said, you're not going to win in this primary. It was probably the most contested primary in the nation in 2010. There was a lot of money involved. And they told me that I should run statewide because they said, with your background, that's where you need to be. Then they were referring to senator or governor. And so in 2018, I got in the race late, and I learned that it's much harder getting signatures than I thought it would be. And a lot of that was because Donald Trump was in the White House, and Democrats who would normally sign the petitions of Republicans just to allow people to get on the ballot basically refused. And that's still in effect. And I went through it again. But I will say I got in the race late, and it's kind of a mistake that I repeated more than once, getting in the race late, because it's not an easy decision. I don't take these decisions lightly. And once I'm in it to win. And so I learned the lesson that signatures are a lot harder than they should be. So this time I actually got in the race late again. It wasn't part of my plan, but I got a call that they needed a credible candidate in this race. And so my wife and I made a decision within 24 hours to do it. But I had to basically drop everything I was doing to make sure I got the signatures. So it turns out I got more than anybody else. I got them in first. I got over 19,000 signatures. So we certainly didn't make that mistake again of coming up short on signatures. But I will tell you, I was proud of our campaign in 2018, even though we didn't get on the ballot. It was my choice. I decided not to turn in my signatures because I didn't have enough confidence in the signatures at that point in time. So my analogy, it was like I was probably the best sprinter in the race. I just had a false start. So I was disqualified, but it didn't mean I wasn't the best candidate in the race. And, nowadays you only get one false start, right? Well, that's kind of the analogy. It used to be you get two. And so I said, it shouldn't detract from my viability as a candidate in the future, as long as I don't make the same mistake again. And we certainly came through in spades this time. So, I'm looking forward to taking one step at a time. So now I do have a primary. 2 other people did get signatures in. And so that's what I'm focused on right now.
Are you considered the front runner?
Yeah, I consider myself a front runner. Just I think I'm being as objective as I can. But the fact that I got in the race late, in some cases months later than the others did, we all started getting signatures at the same time by statute, but they had a big head start in organization, money, and everything else that should have mattered. I still got in more, and I got him in first. So I think that clearly put me in the front runner position. A little bit more controversial. You have prediction markets out there where people are putting money on the line. And I wasn't very familiar with them, but I've learned that they're more accurate than polls because people are putting money on the line, and the money's on what do you think the results will be, as opposed to a poll where they ask, who do you like? And they're not the same thing, obviously. And so there's 2 pretty popular prediction markets out there, Polymarket and Kalshi. Both of them have me way ahead, maybe 25 points or so. But I don't take that as, as gospel, but it is an indicator. So I think most people would consider me the front runner.
Do you think that's more accurate than just regular pollsters out there doing?
Well, that's why I said they I guess they were invented in 2019 by some smart young tech kid.
Right.
At least Polymarket. Polymarket is more robust, but it's about almost $2.5 million on the primary race. So people will bet on anything. I didn't realize they were going to bet that much. Not as much on Kalshi, but I think Kalshi might be a little bit more accurate. I don't know if it's because they focus more on politics, but at this point, like I said, they have proven to be more accurate than polls. Having worked on Trump's 2016 campaign, I saw how misleading the polls are, either deliberately or just because they're not measuring the right things. So I don't have a lot of trust in polls, and they are expensive. Poly markets are free and anybody can opt in. On the other hand, the sample of people who are placing the bets, I don't know who they are. I understand that, Kalshi was just approved by the CFTC. I think they're going to be regulated by the commodities markets instead of under as a security. An interesting development. So they're going to be more regulated now. So I don't know to what extent the people that are putting money down are Virginians or Americans or foreigners, but it's out there right now. So I'll agree with the results as long as it has me way ahead.
Well, I mean, you have unique background, like you said, West Point first in your class, right? Silver Star, CIB combat action in Korea, the first time since the Korean War, was armistice was signed, right? You're not new to politics, like you said. You worked on the 2016 campaign. You were in the Senate Armed Services Committee staff.
Yeah.
Been at Harvard and Kennedy Law School. You were Trump campaign's foreign policy advisor, but you said, I still want to give back. Is it just is it just the drive? Is it your DNA just to continue to serve? And when asked to serve, you said, this is what I'm meant to do and not just retire?
Yeah. Well, Troy, as I mentioned, I believe in this country, and I believe that it is an exceptional country. And the reason people come here is because the things that make America great. And I just don't like what I'm seeing. And I'm going to add something to what you just said. I actually worked for a Democrat politician when I was pretty high level in the Army. I was a 3-star level civilian, and it's not very normal, but I was a Republican that was asked to come in because this is when Bill Cohen came in to be the Secretary of Defense at the latter part of the Clinton administration. So I believe good national security should be nonpartisan or bipartisan or nonpartisan, one of the two. We shouldn't get, basically whipsaw our troops back and forth and what we're doing overseas with our diplomats. I think we should have a steady hand and not change it too much. But I got to the point after serving in Afghanistan twice, very senior levels as a full colonel, as a 2-star in Iraq, as a 1-star. I thought we needed some very disruptive leadership because I thought we were wasting too much American blood and money, and nobody was looking out for the U.S. taxpayer. And to me, it was not only insane, it was almost criminal. And I had appeared on the front page of the Washington Times in 2014, taking on the Obama White House because they were just trying to draw down forces regardless of what the situation was on the ground. And for one of the things my command was responsible for was counter-corruption, money going to a lot of the terrorists. And so sometimes you just got to follow the money, but nobody was really there to follow the money. And I didn't have the tools that I needed to follow the money. And I kept bringing that up. And in the end, my command was closed down. I think the White House's priorities were the wrong ones. And so people, if you're going to be a military officer, it's never good to take on the White House on the front page of a newspaper. But I thought it was important enough to do it. And that ended up bringing my name to the attention of the Trump campaign, where I was asked to come on board as one of his senior advisors. And I played a key role in helping him get elected. I wrote the Trump Doctrine for Foreign Policy after Donald Trump was roundly criticized for not having a coherent foreign policy. And I actually had trouble getting this campaign to approve it because it was a pretty overarching foreign policy doctrine. And I wanted to call it the Trump Doctrine, and they were afraid it was going to tie his hands. But I found a good time to sit down with Mr. Trump, and he read it. He told me he loved it, said, get it published. I told him I wanted to call it the Trump Doctrine. He goes, call it the Trump Doctrine. So I really appreciated him, not only for that, but the other issues I discussed with him. But he's very decisive and he's very intuitive. And so my role was, he was an outside force. And I think we needed some disruption in the way we did business. But I also wanted to help him make that disruption very productive. And I think that at that point in time, he was lacking people with a lot of good national security chops. And I had served on the Senate Armed Services Committee, which is considered the board of directors for the Pentagon. But I was also on the bleeding edge of our military operations, not only in Korea, but also in Iraq and in Afghanistan. So I was able to kind of cover the whole spectrum of, the ultimate customer at the tip of the spear and the policymakers back here in Washington. So I think I fulfill that role. And I know the Senate is a very important institution. It's basically exists to prevent stupid things from happening. And I know national security, and Virginia is very dependent on national defense spending, but everybody wants good national security, and they don't want to spend like crazy to get it. And I think we could be smarter on how we're spending money. So that's one of the key platforms I have, is I want to make sure that we have public safety here at home, national security abroad, and I want to help channel defense dollars to where I think they're actually going to have a positive return on the investment for the American people.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Trump Doctrine. That's what doing some research, it looked like you were pretty well credited with that. Are you bringing some of that forward in your campaign or planning to bring that to the Commonwealth? And also, how do you think that's going to go? How's that going to sell with a state that's kind of been bouncing between blue and purple? Virginia's become a very tough state for a conservative to win at the state level because of pretty much 2 counties. I mean, I'm sure you're bringing that forward. I know you're bringing forward the mantra of faith, family, and freedom. Are you bringing those lessons there too?
Yep. Well, the family is the basic unit of any society. You have to take care of the family first and foremost, but you have to we also have to provide things that family cannot provide for itself. National defense is obviously one of them. I'm going to surprise you a little bit here. I will say, as the senator for all Virginians, not just conservative Virginians, all Virginians, I would be the highest ranking military officer in the U.S. Senate. I would also be the most highly decorated combat veteran in the entire Congress. So I will have a lot of influence on national security policy and defense spending, regardless of where I serve on a committee. And given the importance of our judicial branch and the way I think they've become too partisan and activist, I think I would like to be on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Because as you saw recently in Virginia with the referendum, it took the Virginia Supreme Court to cast it was a 4-3 decision. And I explained to people, even though millions came out, it was decided by 1 vote. It could have gone the other way. So I just want judges that basically call it the way they see it in accordance with the law and not to determine what outcome they want. And I see that too much. And we call it activism. I think the Democrats are the ones that are guilty of it. I think the one thing I could do to help conservatives, you talk about pro-life, you talk about the Second Amendment. I knew the only thing I could do to affect that was to help Donald Trump become elected as a president, where he was able to appoint 3 new Supreme Court justices. And one of them happened to be Neil Gorsuch, who was my summer intern back in the early 90s. So people know I'm a general. They don't know I'm also an attorney. And I went to Harvard Law School. I did some of the biggest deals on Wall Street back in the early 90s. So I know the importance of money to our economy, and to our leading status in the world. And one thing about money that I think does not get enough attention is we are printing so much money now. The dollar is going to lose a status as the world's reserve currency. It's already under threat. And the only reason that it maintains this artificial status that's been in place since the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1948 is because there's no decent alternative. But I think with crypto coming out now, and I say coming out, it's been around for a while, but I think the government has finally decided it has to come to terms with it. So we had the Genius Act months ago, and I think the Clarity Act is on the verge of being passed. I think we need to do everything we can to ensure that the United States still is in charge of the equivalent of a world's reserve currency. The petrodollar agreement that we entered to in the 1970s has artificially kept the dollar much more valuable than it would otherwise be. And I think we've taken that for granted back since 1971 when Nixon made the quote unquote temporary change to take us off the gold standard. I think it's been downhill since then. People are losing their wealth, whatever accumulated money they have, their savings, just through inflation. It's just another form of taxation, but it's one that the politicians can get away with. So I think focusing on the monetary part and the judicial part is a place where this general wants to apply his skills.
You may find yourself on a lot of committees once you get elected.
Well, I don't think I get to pick all the ones I want, but
they may pick you. I mean, I'm ready to. I'm thinking of 3, 4, 5 right now that you should be on. Must be the chair of. If you can go a couple more minutes, if you don't mind. I know we're just over an hour.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I told you it was going to go quick. I am kind of curious. I mean, you mentioned Second Amendment, so one of the questions I wanted to ask was kind of where President Trump was in his first term on national reciprocity. He said if it came to him, he'd sign it. I know it had, it had almost passed in the first one. It's kind of sitting there now, I think, in the Senate to get passed. I think the House passed it. What are your thoughts on the Second Amendment in general, but more important, national reciprocity for pistol carry?
Well, as I said, I think that this is in the province of the Supreme Court now, and was the Brune decision in 2022. I think it's kind of going to set the standards, just the way the Dobbs decision for pro-life. A lot of it would be left up to the states on the abortion issue, but when it comes to the Second Amendment, I think it's the opposite. I think that they set a standard, and the states might try to pull a fast one, like I think it's happening in Virginia now. They have on their I'm gonna have to double check that. They just passed some laws in Virginia limiting the size of magazines and trying to restrict the Second Amendment rights in other ways. And I don't think it's going to pass muster at the national level. If you look at the Virginia Constitution, the language in the Virginia Constitution on the guns is almost identical to the one in the federal Constitution. So I don't understand what they don't get about it. So that's one reason if I'm on the House, I'm in the Senate Judiciary Committee, I'm going to ensure that we have judges that can understand the black and white of our U.S. Constitution. I mean, it is the Second Amendment after all. It's not like the third or fourth or fifth. It's right after the First Amendment. It's pretty clear what the founders' intent was. The standard review is really the plain language. What did that language mean to the average sentient person back when it was written? And so, you know what? Just like any other American, I want to keep guns out of the hands of idiots, okay? We can all agree on that. We want to keep guns out of the hands of irresponsible people. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy to discriminate among those who are going to be responsible and those who are going to create problems for everybody. I wish there was a solution. But until that time, I mean, there's a reason that we are such a stable society. And I have friends, and I have actually relatives by marriage that are from Iran. And they said, if Iran had a Second Amendment right now, this crazy theocracy that they put up with over all these decades would never have survived as long as they can. So the gun rights folks are going to have a strong proponent with having me as your senator. The Constitution, I'm not saying the Constitution is perfect, by the way. I don't think many Republicans will come out and say that. There are things about the Constitution, obviously, that didn't change with the times, and maybe they should. I kind of throw out the fact that there's no Air Force in the Constitution or no Marine Corps, but they do have armies and they do have a Navy, right? For example. So I understand that technology sometimes will cause it to change, or at least we should consider that within the language of the Constitution. But I think the Democrats on the other side of the aisle are trying to do things that are just totally out of left field when it comes to an honest reading of what the founders intended.
Yeah, well, as you know, I live in New York, unfortunately. The Bruen decision is Bruen versus New York, very close to it. Something most people don't know, is that last week the Governor Hochul snuck it in the 27 budget that she is banning Glocks in the state of New York. So she didn't call it by name, she called it by description. And right now, a lot of my friends, they are banning Glocks to be purchased in the state. I don't know if it's going to go retroactive or what. Obviously, the GOA and many other organizations are already filing suit, but they snuck that through the 27 budget. And, Virginia to me has become a very hot point for politics. We know New York's going to be the way it is, and California is going to be the way they are, New Jersey. But Virginia is the kind of the birthplace of our country when you think about it, and it has been always associated with very founding fathers kind of mindset. To see what Spanberger's done now and everything that's happened in that state with the schools and what was going on with the transgenders and boys and girls rooms and all that stuff, and how blue and purple it's become, it's really sad. I think that's why Virginia's gotten so much attention, because it's right there right next to the Capitol, and it majority of the state acreage wise does not think like Loudoun and Fairfax County do. And to see how she got elected and how others, I don't know if it's called the Assembly or what, pretty much both houses are aligned with the Democrats, and Virginia's pushing some stuff through that I think would make the founding fathers of Virginia turn over in their graves.
Yes. It's a really kind of shame that, our General Assembly here in Virginia is actually the modern day incarnation of the oldest legislature in the New World. We started with the House of Burgesses in Williamsburg. And yes, one of my little slogans is I want to make Virginia sane again. So I know I'm not going to be in a state elected position, but I'll be in a federal elected position. And by virtue of being a U.S. Senator from Virginia, I will do what I can to help good, reasonable people get elected to the General Assembly, either in the House of Delegates or in the state Senate. So we have 100 delegates, we have 40 senators. I don't know if a lot of people know this. It's a very traditional type of legislature where you're a citizen legislator. And I think their pay is around $22,000 a year.
Yeah, it's not much. You're right.
And we've preserved that tradition. They're coming back to work on the budget now. We'll have to ask one of those representatives how well they think it works. But the stuff that the Democrats are trying to push through with the referendum being Exhibit A, I went out there and I fought against it. It's a shame that the Virginia Supreme Court took a while to make their decision, or actually to hear the case. I'm a bit of a minority right now. I'm actually saying that the Virginia Supreme Court, and I have to be a little careful about this language, but I'll just throw it out there, is guilty of judicial malpractice by not taking up the case for the referendum. Now, Republicans are happy because the end result went their way, but about $88 million was spent on that referendum. And the Virginia Supreme Court considered 1 out of 4 potential issues, and it turned out to be, what is the definition of an election? That was the sole issue that they confronted in deciding that the referendum was unconstitutional. And unfortunately, it should have been a 7-0 vote. The fact that it's a 4-3 vote basically underscores the point I made about the Democrat partisanship when it comes to judicial activism. But that's another issue. I believe in, if I can help good people get elected to the General Assembly, they will help elect good judges. That's the way it works in Virginia. The General Assembly, by virtue of a majority in both houses, is how the justices get elected to the state Supreme Court, the appellate court, and to the, I'm pretty sure the circuit courts and the general district courts, at least for the circuit courts. But having said that, the Virginia Supreme Court followed a doctrine from a 1912 case. I think the name was Scott versus James. And one of the findings of that 1912 case, and if you do the math, what is that, 114 years old, was that the court should not get involved in an election until the election results came out. Well, in this case, it was kind of stupid because they had all the facts necessary to render that referendum, the referendum was considered a special election. All the facts were already present. What is the definition of an election? We've been a democracy for getting close to 250 years now. You would think that we would know that, wouldn't you? So, I mean, the Democrats themselves threw a little bit of a wrench into it, but when they talked about 45 days of voting, but to the average person, election is the process of electing somebody. And if that process is a 45-day process, then that's part of the definition of election. But they could have saved about $88 million of money spent by both sides, mainly by the Democrats. That's one reason the Republicans are happy. But think about the other things that $88 million could have been put toward infrastructure. I mean, I would have been happy if they would have paid a lot of the tolls that people up in the more congested parts of the state are enduring right now. These tolls have gotten crazy. Yeah. But to me, it's bad government. It's very inefficient. And I might write something about that later. It's not a primary election issue. But to me, it's the fact that I want the government to be efficient.
Right. You ask, you would think we would know that after 250 years. Yes, most people with common sense would, but we also have Supreme Court justices that cannot define what a woman is. So I'm just going to leave that one right there. I mean, should be a surprise.
Okay, got me on that
one. But anyways, I got one last question for you before I open it up to you. Just for our listeners and viewers, I mean, hopefully many are in Virginia. I know I'm going to be publicizing this a lot to folks there. What would you say is going to be some of your top couple of priorities day one once elected? I know day one is a relative term, but once you get
day one after I'm a senator?
Yes, after you're a senator.
Yeah, so for those who know the institution, and I did work in the U.S. Senate, as I said, as a very senior staffer, so I know how it works. if you really want to serve the way you told the people you want, you got to get on the right committee. And so hopefully the Republicans keep the majority leader. You would expect John Thune to continue in that role. And he will be instrumental in assigning new senators to committees. And so I think there's 4 committees that are considered top tier committees: appropriations, of course, the budget, and judiciary, and armed services. So I would like to get on the Senate Appropriations Committee. Everybody thinks it's hard to get on that. It's really not as hard as it is in the House. In the Senate, they have a defense subcommittee that decides all the defense spending. So if you look at the federal budget, over half the federal budget is already preordained. It's mandatory entitlement type spend, Social Security, Medicare, what have you. But out of the part that is discretionary, the defense budget is got the lion's share. I think it's around 50% of that. So the defense subcommittee of the Senate Appropriations Committee is a place to be if you actually want to have some sway on where the dollars go. So that would probably be my first choice, along with the Senate Judiciary Committee, for the reasons I just stated. And if I wanted to affect national security policy, I think I could walk over to the SR 228, where the committee staff is, and where the chairman and the other people are. And I think given my background, I think they would listen to me what I have to say.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought up committees are where it's done. I mean,
it is. I mean, I heard people saying that they're going to go in and introduce a bill on the first day, and I'm thinking that just shows that you don't know how things work.
Right. So doing your time as a staff there definitely has gotten you prepped for it. Hey, Bert, kept you a long time. I appreciate it, but I want to give you an opportunity to all of our guests. We like if there's anything that's near and dear to your heart that we did not talk about, any cause, or just anything you want to leave our listeners and viewers with that just you want to make sure you highlight. I want to give you an opportunity to do that.
Well, I would like to highlight the role of my wife. Like I mentioned, I was getting calls to get in this race. It was not an easy thing to do emotionally, financially. We had other plans. I've got a lot of projects, like anybody else out there, a lot of projects that need to get done, but we had to make a decision in 24 hours, and she felt as strongly as I do, maybe even more. And she's been my driver. She's been my confidant. I mean, she's been driving me all over the Commonwealth. And so I just want to let people know this is a joint decision. I kind of joked that I told you I was one of 6 kids. Well, they're all boys. I was one of 6 boys. I was in the last all-male class at West Point. My entire time on active duty as a junior officer was with the infantry, which were only men, no women, both in Italy and in Korea. And so I wasn't exactly the world's expert on women, but my wife's making up for lost time now. The women are very active and organized when it comes to politics, at least on the Republican side. And so I want to let people know that it's not just me. I got some great help. I got some great supporters. I was amazed at all the help I got getting signatures. And I don't want to be crass, but money is the lifeblood of politics. There's a high correlation between being well-funded and winning elections. And even though you can boil it down to the fact that the person who gets the most votes wins, just getting your name out there and what you're about, you just can't do it automatically without sufficient resources. So I would ask people to check out my website. It's bert4senate.com. I think my name's on the screen. Bert, who's the B-E-R-T, bert4senate.com. Check it out. I have a lean staff. We're being fiscally conservative. I think we're making up for it by getting to as many places as we can, including talking to shows like yours. And I do appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. We've been rolling that the website down below the whole time. We want to make sure people knew it. But hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I really do for some of your evening. And I'm going to be following. We're definitely going to get the word out about this show and be talking to folks that we know live in that area. I wish I had lived in Virginia because I would be out there with you. The common sense. That's all I can think of is you're running on a foundation of common sense, and I really like that.
I wish common sense wasn't so rare, but thanks. I appreciate that.
but it's you will be a breath of fresh air once you win. I'm fully confident you are. But thank you so much, Bert. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show. I wish Toby could have been here tonight, but we'll be following you, man. We'll stay in touch.
Thanks, Troy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.